The beeping was getting slower. The ventilator hissed beside me. I couldn't move, couldn't talk, but I could hear every single word. "You've lived long enough, Mom. It's time for you to go." Her hand reached for my ventilator tubing. That's when I knew my own daughter was trying to kill me. But the door burst open, and what happened next changed everything. Hey everyone, welcome back to Her Real Stories. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell because we share real stories that'll blow your mind. And to all my returning subscribers, thank you for being part of this amazing family. Today's story is about a mom who discovered the ultimate betrayal and got the most satisfying revenge ever. Trust me, you won't want to miss this one. My name is Maren Ashford, and I'm 72 years old. Back then, I thought I had the perfect daughter. Blythe was 38, married to a man named Callum, and they lived in this beautiful house that I'd helped them buy. They had 2 kids, Emma and Jake, who were the lights of my life. I thought we were a close family. I thought Blythe loved me. I was so wrong it almost killed me. Literally. It started with chest pains on a Tuesday morning. I was making my usual breakfast of oatmeal and coffee when this crushing weight hit my chest like a truck. The pain shot down my left arm, and I knew immediately what was happening. Heart attack. I managed to call 911 before I collapsed on my kitchen floor, staring up at the ceiling fan that needed dusting, thinking this might be the last thing I ever saw. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and worried voices. The paramedics kept talking to me, asking me questions I couldn't answer because the pain was so bad. "Stay with us, Maren," one of them kept saying. "Don't you give up on us now." I remember thinking about Blythe, about how scared she'd be when she found out, about how she'd rush to the hospital to be by my side, about how she'd hold my hand and tell me everything would be okay. I woke up in the ICU 3 days later. Machines everywhere, wires attached to my chest, and this horrible tube down my throat helping me breathe. The nurse, a kind woman named Patricia, explained that I'd had a massive heart attack. They'd had to do emergency surgery to clear the blockage. "You're lucky to be alive, honey," she said, checking my 4. "Your daughter's been here every day, waiting for you to wake up." That made me feel warm inside, even though everything else felt cold and scary. My Blythe, staying by my bedside, worried sick about her mom. When Patricia left, I closed my eyes and tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. The medications made everything fuzzy, but my hearing was sharp as glass. Every sound in that hospital seemed amplified. Footsteps in the hallway, monitors beeping, nurses talking softly at their station. That's when I heard voices outside my room. Blythe and Callum, talking in those whispers that sound loud when you're not supposed to hear them. "The accounts are almost empty," Callum was saying. "She won't even know what happened." My blood went cold. Colder than the hospital room, colder than the 4 fluid dripping into my arm. What accounts was he talking about? "Mom uses the same 3 passwords for everything," Blythe said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Her birthday backwards, her maiden name with numbers, and that stupid dog's name from when I was little. I could hack into her stuff in my sleep. They were talking about my money, my savings accounts, my retirement funds, everything I'd worked 40 years to build. But it got worse. So much worse. "How much did we get total?" Blythe asked, like she was asking about groceries or gas money. $3.2 million, Callum said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. 35 years of her squirreling money away, and now it's ours. She'll never even know it's gone. $3.2 million. That was my entire life's work. Every overtime shift I'd picked up at the accounting firm. Every vacation I'd skipped to save money. Every nice restaurant meal I'd said no to. Every new car I decided I didn't really need. Every sacrifice I'd made so I could have security in my old age, so I wouldn't be a burden on anyone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip out all these wires and tubes and confront them right there. But I couldn't move. The medications had me paralyzed, trapped in my own body while they stood outside my room dividing up my life savings like they were splitting a pizza. My heart monitor started beeping faster, but they were too busy planning to notice. Then Blythe said something that still wakes me up at night. "You know what, Cal? She's suffered enough. We should just help her along. Make it easier for everyone." I heard footsteps, and through my barely open eyes, I saw them coming into my room. Blythe looked beautiful, like always. Her blonde hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, even though she was supposedly worried sick about her dying mother. Callum hung back by the door, playing lookout. He'd always been a coward, letting Blythe do the dirty work while he kept his hands clean. At least, that's what he thought he was doing. Blythe came closer to my bed, her heels clicking on the hospital floor. "Poor Mom," she said softly, loud enough that anyone passing by would think she was being loving. "She's in so much pain." Her hand reached toward my ventilator tubing, the clear plastic tube that was keeping me alive, pumping precious air into my damaged lungs. She was going to disconnect it. My own daughter, the little girl I'd raised by myself after her father left, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, was about to murder me for money. My heart monitor started going crazy, beeping faster and louder. "What are you doing?" Callum hissed from the doorway. "The machines are going off." Blythe's fingers were inches from my ventilator tubing when the door exploded open. A nurse and respiratory therapist rushed in like angels in scrubs, looking at all the alarms going off. My oxygen levels had dropped because I was panicking because I couldn't breathe knowing my daughter wanted me dead. "What's happening in here?" the nurse demanded, looking at Blythe and Callum with suspicious eyes. They jumped back from my bed like they'd been caught with their hands in a cookie jar. Their faces went white as sheets. "We were just checking on Mom," Blythe stammered, putting on her innocent voice, the one she'd used to get out of trouble since she was 5 years old. But the respiratory therapist was looking at my ventilator tubing, which had been partially dislodged. Not disconnected, but loose enough to affect my breathing. She looked at Blythe, then at the line, then back at Blythe. Her eyes narrowed like a detective who'd just found a smoking gun. "Everyone needs to leave," she said firmly.
"Right now.
This patient needs to rest." As they walked out, I heard Callum whisper, "That was too close." And Blythe replied, "We'll try again later." Try again later. Those words burned themselves into my brain like a brand. They weren't giving up. They were just waiting for a better opportunity to finish what they'd started. I was trapped in that bed, helpless, while 2 people planned my murder. The respiratory therapist, whose name tag said Marcus, adjusted the ventilator and checked all my connections. "You're okay now, Mrs. Ashford," he said gently. "Your levels are coming back up." But I wasn't okay. I would never be okay again. Because now I knew what my daughter really thought of me. I was just an obstacle between her and my money. A problem to be solved. Patricia, my day nurse, came back an hour later. She'd been taking care of me since I arrived, and I could tell she genuinely cared about her patients. "How are you feeling, honey?" she asked, checking my chart. I tried to communicate with my eyes, tried to tell her what had happened, but the tube in my throat made it impossible to talk, and she probably thought I was just confused from the medications. That night was the longest of my life. Every time someone came into my room, I wondered if it was them coming to finish the job. Every shadow in the doorway could be my daughter, coming to unplug me from life. The machines beeped steadily around me, keeping track of a heart that was broken in more ways than one. I stared at the ceiling tiles and counted them over and over, anything to keep my mind busy. The next day, Dr. Peterson came to check on me. He was this older gentleman who reminded me of my father, with kind eyes and gentle hands. "You're making good progress, Marin," he said, looking at my chart. "We might be able to remove the breathing tube tomorrow, if you keep improving." Remove the tube. That meant I'd be able to talk again. able to tell someone what Blythe and Callum were planning. But it also meant I'd be more vulnerable. Right now, with all these machines monitoring me, it would be harder for them to hurt me without setting off alarms. Once I was breathing on my own, it would be easier for them to make my death look natural. An old woman with a bad heart, dying peacefully in her sleep.
Who would question that?
Blythe came to visit that afternoon, bringing flowers and wearing her concerned daughter mask. "Hi, Mom," she said sweetly, kissing my forehead like a loving child. "I brought your favorite daisies." She sat in the chair next to my bed and took my hand, the same hand that had tried to kill me yesterday. "The doctors say you're doing better." "That's such good news." I stared at her, trying to see any trace of the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried in my arms when boys broke her heart, who'd called me her best friend. But all I saw was a stranger wearing Blythe's face, a beautiful mask hiding something ugly and cold. "I've been thinking about when you get out of here," she continued, her voice soft and caring for anyone who might be listening. "Maybe it would be better if you came to live with us. You know, just until you're back on your feet. Live with them. Where they could control everything I ate, everything I drank, where they could make sure there were no witnesses when they decided it was time for me to go." She squeezed my hand. "We could take such good care of you, Mom. Make sure you're comfortable." Comfortable. That was probably their code word for dead. I squeezed back, not because I was agreeing, but because I was promising myself something. If I survived this, if I got out of this hospital alive, I was going to make them pay for what they'd done. And what they were planning to do. That evening, Marcus came to remove my breathing tube. "This might be uncomfortable for a minute," he warned, "but then you'll be able to talk again." As he pulled out the tube, I coughed and gasped, my throat raw and burning. But I could breathe on my own. I could talk. I could finally tell someone what was happening to me. "Water," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. Patricia brought me iced chips, and slowly, carefully, I started to explain. "My daughter," I whispered. "She tried to disconnect my ventilator. She's stealing my money. She wants me dead." Patricia frowned, probably thinking I was confused or paranoid from the medications. "Honey, that's a serious accusation," she said gently. But Marcus was listening too, and he remembered yesterday. "I didn't notice the ventilator tubing was partially loose when we came in," he said thoughtfully. "And the family seemed nervous when we arrived." Patricia looked at him, then back at me. "Mrs. Ashford, if you're saying someone tried to hurt you, we need to report this. Do you understand what you're telling us?" I nodded weakly. "Check my bank accounts," I whispered. $3.2 million. Gone. I gave Janet what she needed to open a formal report and later provided full identity information directly to Agent Martinez. Within 2 hours, a social worker named Janet was sitting beside my bed, taking notes while I told her everything I'd heard. Janet was all business, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Ashford, these are very serious allegations. Elder abuse, attempted murder, financial fraud. If what you're saying is true, your daughter and her husband could go to prison for a very long time." Prison. The word hung in the air like smoke. My daughter in prison. It should have made me sad, but all I felt was cold satisfaction. "We're going to need evidence," Janet continued. "The hospital security cameras, your medical records from yesterday, and we'll need to verify the financial theft." Evidence. That was something I understood. I'd spent 40 years as a forensic accountant, tracking money, finding paper trails, building cases that prosecutors could win. If they wanted evidence, I knew exactly how to give it to them. The next few days were a blur of interviews, phone calls, and meetings. The hospital security team reviewed the camera footage from outside my room. There it was, clear as day, Blythe reaching for my ventilator tubing while Callum stood guard at the door. Their faces when the alarms went off, the guilt written across their features like a confession. My bank confirmed the worst. $3.2 million transferred out of my accounts over the past month using forged power of attorney documents. Small amounts at first, test runs to make sure the system would accept the transfers. Then bigger chunks, moved through multiple accounts to make them harder to trace. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years. Dr. Peterson discharged me after a week, with strict instructions about medications and follow-up appointments. "You're lucky to be alive, Marin," he said, shaking my hand. "Take care of yourself."
Lucky.
I was starting to understand that luck had nothing to do with it. Sometimes survival is just stubbornness, wearing a different name. I went home to my little white house with the boxwood hedges I kept trimmed too perfectly. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. I walked through rooms that suddenly felt foreign, knowing that Blythe had been here, going through my papers, copying my passwords, planning my death, while I watered my plants and made her favorite cookies. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of tap water and made a plan. Not an emotional, screaming, dramatic plan. A cold, methodical, professional plan that would destroy them both completely. See, most people think revenge is about anger, about getting even. But real revenge is about justice, about making sure that people who hurt innocent victims can't do it again. I called Julian Pike, the lawyer who'd handled my house purchase 10 years earlier. Julian was in his 60s, with silver hair and a reputation for winning cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. "Julian," I said when he picked up the phone, "I need your help. And before you ask if I want to press charges, the answer is yes. I want to press every charge possible." Julian listened while I told him everything. The attempted murder, the financial theft, the forged documents. When I finished, there was silence on the line for a long moment. Then he said, "Marin, if half of what you're telling me is true, your daughter is going to prison. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Blythe's hand reaching for my ventilator tubing. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm prepared." The first step was preservation of evidence. Julian sent litigation hold letters to preserve hospital footage, bank logs, and telecom metadata, then pursued subpoenas through the court. In legal terms, this is called a litigation hold. In practical terms, it means building a wall around every piece of evidence before anyone can destroy it. Next, I hired Jasper Klein, a forensic accountant recommended by Julian. Jasper looked like a substitute math teacher, with thick glasses and a quiet voice, but he was a bloodhound when it came to tracking stolen money. Within a week, he had mapped out exactly how Blythe and Callum had accessed my accounts, where they'd moved the money, and how they'd tried to cover their tracks. The fake power of attorney was their first mistake. They used my guest passwords where they could, and a forged power of attorney for institutions that required formal documentation. Callum had convinced one of his golf buddies, a guy named Steve who was a notary, to backdate the document and swear that I'd been present when it was signed. But I'd been in the hospital that day, surrounded by witnesses and recorded on security cameras. Steve was about to become very sorry he'd agreed to help his friend. Their second mistake was getting greedy. The initial transfers were small, a few thousand here and there to test the system. But once they realized it worked, they got sloppy. Large transfers during business hours, multiple transactions from the same IP address, phone calls to the bank using my personal information while I was unconscious in the ICU. Every click, every call, every transaction left a digital fingerprint. But I wasn't just building a legal case. I was planning something much more comprehensive, something that would destroy not just their freedom, but their reputation, their relationships, their entire carefully constructed life. Because taking my money was just the beginning. Trying to kill me was personal. And I've always believed that personal attacks deserve personal responses. Step one of my revenge plan was letting them think they'd gotten away with it. I called Blythe from the hospital and told her I was confused about some financial things, but not to worry about it. I was probably just mixed up from the medications. I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. "Don't worry about it, Mom," she said sweetly. "I'll help you figure everything out when you're feeling better." When I got home, they came to visit with flowers and concerned faces. Emma and Jake, my grandchildren, ran to hug me, and for a moment I almost forgot what their parents had done. Almost. But then I saw Callum looking around my house with calculating eyes, probably figuring out what they could sell after I was dead. And Blythe kept asking about my medications, how I was feeling, whether I was having any chest pains. I played the part of the grateful, confused old mother. "I'm so lucky to have you two taking care of me," I told them. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Blythe squeezed my hand and said, "We'll always take care of you, Mom. Always." The lies rolled off her tongue like honey, sweet and poisonous. That night, after they left, I sat in my living room and realized I was mourning. Not for myself, but for the daughter I thought I had. The Blythe who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them beautiful flowers. The teenager who'd cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. The young mother who'd asked me to be in the delivery room when Emma was born. That person was gone if she'd ever really existed. The next morning, I started phase 2 of my plan. I called my bank and Adult Protective Services first to open formal reports, then notified my insurer. APS and my attorney urged me to escalate to federal law enforcement because of the wire transfers and identity theft. I called my insurance company and told them I was concerned about some suspicious activity on my accounts. They transferred me to their fraud department, where a sharp-voiced woman named Carol took down every detail of what had happened. "Mrs. Ashford," she said, "this sounds like a case for law enforcement. Have you contacted the police?" "Not yet," I told her, but I was planning to. Carol explained that insurance fraud was a federal crime, especially when it involved elder abuse. She gave me the number for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and suggested I call them immediately. The FBI. I never thought I'd be talking to federal agents, but here I was, about to become a whistleblower against my own daughter. Agent Sarah Martinez met me at a coffee shop downtown, looking more like a soccer mom than a federal investigator. But when she started asking questions, I could see the sharp intelligence behind her friendly smile. "Mrs. Ashford, financial elder abuse is one of the fastest-growing crimes in America," she said. "Most victims never report it because they're embarrassed or they don't want to get family members in trouble." I told her I wasn't embarrassed and I definitely wanted my family members in trouble. Agent Martinez took notes while I explained everything, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. When I finished, she said, "We're going to need your full cooperation for an investigation like this. Are you prepared for that? It could take months, maybe years."
Years.
I thought about Blythe's hand on my ventilator tubing, about Callum counting my stolen money, about the grandchildren who would grow up thinking their parents were criminals. "Agent Martinez," I said, "I'm 72 years old. I don't have unlimited time left, but whatever time I do have, I want to spend it making sure they can't do this to anyone else." The FBI investigation moved slowly, like a glacier that crushes everything in its path. Agent Martinez and her team subpoenaed bank records, phone logs, computer files, security footage. They interviewed hospital staff, bank employees, anyone who'd had contact with Blythe or Callum during the relevant time period. Every conversation was recorded, every document photographed, every digital trail mapped. Meanwhile, I was playing the long game with Blythe and Callum themselves. I invited them to dinner the following Sunday, saying I wanted to thank them for all their help during my recovery. Blythe was delighted.
"Of course, Mom," she said.
"We'd love to come. Should we bring the kids?" "Yes," I told her. I wanted to see Emma and Jake again, maybe for the last time before their world exploded. I spent Saturday preparing, but not just the meal. I set up recording devices throughout my dining room, one hidden in the flower arrangement, one disguised as a phone charger plugged into the wall, and my watch, which could record high-quality audio for hours. Everything was legal, since it was my house and my conversation. Sunday dinner was a performance worthy of Broadway. I served Blythe's favorite pot roast with all the trimmings, using the good china we'd inherited from my mother. Emma and Jake chattered about school and friends, innocent and happy, unaware that their parents were criminals. Blythe complimented the food and asked about my health. Callum talked about his work and complained about the economy. After dinner, while the kids watched television in the living room, I served coffee and brought up the subject that had been eating at me. "I'm still confused about some things from when I was in the hospital," I said casually. "I live in a one-party consent state, so recording my own conversation in my home was legal." Blythe and Callum exchanged a quick glance. "What kind of dreams, Mom?" Blythe asked, her voice carefully neutral. I stirred sugar into my coffee and pretended to think. Dreams about money being moved around, passwords being used. Silly things, really. I'm sure it's nothing. Callum laughed, too loud and too long. "Hospitals will mess with your head," he said. "All those drugs and machines." That's when I asked the question I'd been building toward all evening. "How did you know about my retirement accounts? I never told anyone about those." The room went very quiet. Emma's laughter from the living room sounded far away. Blythe took a sip of coffee, stalling for time. "What do you mean, Mom?" "Someone accessed those accounts while I was unconscious," I said, still keeping my voice casual and confused. "The bank called and asked me about some transfers. Large transfers. But I don't remember making any transfers." I watched their faces, saw the fear creeping in behind their masks. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." Callum was starting to sweat, but Blythe was made of stronger stuff. She leaned forward and took my hand, looking concerned. "Mom, are you sure you didn't make those transfers and just forget? You've been through a lot. Maybe you moved some money around before the heart attack and it's all mixed up in your memory." But I pressed harder. "The bank said someone used my passwords. But I never gave my passwords to anyone. How would someone know my passwords?" And that's when Blythe made the mistake that would destroy her life. She got cocky. She actually laughed and said, "Mom, you use the same 3 passwords for everything. Your birthday backwards, your maiden name with numbers, and Rusty's name from when I was little. I could guess your passwords in my sleep." Callum saw what she'd done immediately. His face went white, and he tried to kick her under the table, but it was too late. She'd just confessed to accessing my accounts illegally. But she wasn't done digging her own grave. "Besides," she continued, "you were on so many medications, you wouldn't have known what was happening anyway." We had to move fast to protect her assets. Protect my assets. That's what they were calling theft now. Callum jumped in, trying to limit the damage. "What Blythe means is we were worried about hospital bills and thought we should move some money into more accessible accounts." But then he made his own fatal error. "The doctor said you might not make it. We were just being prepared. Being prepared for me to die so they could inherit my money. Except they hadn't waited for me to actually die. They'd stolen it while I was fighting for my life, and then tried to speed up the process by disconnecting my ventilator. Everything was being recorded in perfect digital quality. Every word, every confession, every lie." I nodded sympathetically. "I understand. You were trying to help." But inside, I was celebrating. They just handed me everything I needed to put them in prison for the rest of their lives. The conversation moved on to safer topics, but the damage was done. When they left that evening, hugging me goodbye and promising to check on me soon, they had no idea they'd just confessed to multiple felonies. Monday morning, I delivered copies of the recordings to Julian Pike and Agent Martinez. Julian listened to them twice, shaking his head in amazement. "Marin, they just confessed to everything. Financial fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, attempted murder. This is one of the strongest cases I've ever seen." Agent Martinez was equally impressed. Mrs. Ashford, this recording is pure gold. We can move forward with federal charges immediately. The next phase of my plan was psychological warfare. I cleared every step with Julian and kept Agent Martinez informed so nothing jeopardized the case. I wanted them to know that something was wrong, that their perfect crime was unraveling, but I wanted them to panic and make more mistakes. So I started asking questions. I called Blythe and mentioned that I'd gotten a strange call from the bank about account activity. I told Callum that an insurance investigator wanted to meet with me about my hospital stay. They tried to play it cool, but I could hear the stress in their voices. Blythe suggested that maybe I shouldn't talk to any investigators without her present. You're still recovering, Mom. You might say something that could be misunderstood. Callum offered to handle all my financial matters for me. Let me take care of the boring money stuff, he said. You just focus on getting better. But the pressure was getting to them. I started noticing changes. Blythe lost weight and developed dark circles under her eyes. Callum started drinking more, calling me at odd hours to ask rambling questions about whether I'd talked to anyone about anything. Their marriage, which had always seemed solid, started showing cracks. I heard them fighting when they thought I couldn't listen. Sharp, whispered arguments about whose fault it was, about what they should do next, about whether they should run. Maybe we should take the kids and go visit your sister in Oregon, Callum suggested during one call. But Blythe shut him down. Running would make us look guilty. We just have to stay calm and stick to our story. Their story was falling apart faster than they could patch it together. The FBI had traced the money through multiple bank accounts, identified the fake power of attorney, and interviewed the notary who'd admitted to backdating the document. Steve, Callum's golf buddy, had cracked under pressure and agreed to testify against them in exchange for a reduced sentence. Meanwhile, I was working on the public relations aspect of my revenge. Blythe cared almost as much about her reputation as she did about money. Her whole identity was built on being the perfect daughter, the successful wife, the devoted mother. She had a carefully curated social media presence showing her beautiful home, her designer clothes, her happy family. I was about to tear that facade down brick by brick. I started with her closest friends, not with accusations or dramatic revelations, but with subtle questions and carefully placed doubts. When her friend Rachel called to check on my health, I mentioned how confused I was about some financial matters. I'm sure it's nothing, I said sadly, but someone's been accessing my accounts. The bank says it looks like family fraud. I just can't imagine who would do such a thing. Rachel, being a good friend, immediately called Blythe to warn her that someone might be trying to frame her for financial fraud. But instead of being grateful, Blythe panicked. She called me, angry and defensive. Mom, what are you telling people? Rachel says you think someone in the family stole from you. I played innocent. I'm just confused, honey. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding. But the seed was planted. Rachel started paying closer attention to Blythe's behavior, noticing the stress cracks that were starting to show. When Blythe posted pictures of an expensive new handbag on social media, Rachel wondered where the money had come from. When Callum bragged about a big investment opportunity at a dinner party, she remembered my concerns about financial fraud. I did the same thing with other friends, other family members, anyone who might have reason to trust or admire Blythe and Callum. Not accusations, just concerns. Just confusion about strange financial activity and mysterious bank transfers. Just an old woman trying to figure out what had happened to her life savings while she was unconscious in the hospital. The beautiful thing about this approach was that it was completely true. I really was confused and concerned. I really had lost my life savings. I really didn't understand how someone had accessed my accounts. The only thing I wasn't mentioning was that I knew exactly who had done it and was building an airtight case against them. As word spread through their social circle, Blythe and Callum found themselves facing subtle questions and sideways looks. Friends stopped inviting them to parties. Neighbors avoided conversation. Emma and Jake started asking why people were being weird around them. The perfect life they'd tried to steal from me was crumbling from the inside out. 3 months after my heart attack, Agent Martinez called with news I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Ashford, we're ready to make arrests. The grand jury has issued indictments for elder abuse, wire fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. We'll be serving warrants tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. After months of planning and patience, justice was finally coming. I asked if I could be there when they were arrested. Agent Martinez hesitated. It's not usual for victims to witness arrests, she said. And it might be traumatic for you. But I insisted. After everything they'd put me through, I wanted to see their faces when they realized their perfect crime had been exposed. I wanted to watch their world collapse. The arrests happened at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, when Blythe and Callum would be home getting the kids ready for school. I sat in an unmarked FBI vehicle across the street, watching as agents approached their front door. The same door I'd walked through hundreds of times, bringing birthday gifts and Christmas presents, never knowing that the people inside were planning to murder me. Agent Martinez knocked firmly. FBI, open the door. There was a long pause, then Callum's voice, shaky and scared. What's this about? Mr. Thompson, we have federal warrants for your arrest and the arrest of Blythe Thompson. Open the door now. I could see neighbors peeking out windows, drawn by the commotion. When the door finally opened, Callum was in his bathrobe, his hair messy from sleep. There must be some mistake, he kept saying. We haven't done anything wrong. But Agent Martinez was reading him his rights, and 2 other agents were entering the house to find Blythe. I could hear Emma and Jake crying, confused and frightened by the strangers in their house. Blythe appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her perfect hair for once not styled. She saw the handcuffs and started screaming. This is insane. We didn't do anything. Someone's lying about us. Her eyes swept the street and landed on the FBI vehicle where I was sitting. Even from a distance, I could see the moment she realized who was responsible for her arrest. They brought her to the car in handcuffs, and as they passed my window, she looked directly at me. The beautiful mask was completely gone now. Her face was twisted with rage and hate, the real Blythe finally showing herself. You did this, she mouthed through the glass. You destroyed your own family, but she was wrong. She destroyed our family the moment she decided to steal from me and try to kill me. Callum was more pathetic, crying and begging as they led him away. Please, my kids are watching. Don't let my kids see this. But it was too late for that. Emma and Jake were at the window, watching their parents being arrested by federal agents. Their childhood innocence was ending right there on their front lawn. A social worker arrived to take temporary custody of the children. My heart broke for them, but they deserved better than parents who were criminals. The social worker, a kind woman named Mrs. Delgado, gently explained to Emma and Jake that they would be staying with their aunt for a while until everything got sorted out. As the FBI cars drove away with Blythe and Callum in custody, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but a strange kind of emptiness. For months, planning their downfall had given me purpose, something to focus on besides my own mortality. Now that it was over, I was just a 72-year-old woman sitting alone in a car, watching the destruction of what used to be my family. But I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself. The legal system moved slowly, and there was still work to do. Julian Pike called me that afternoon to discuss strategy for the civil case. Marin, the criminal charges are just the beginning, he explained. We need to file civil suits to recover your stolen money and get additional damages for pain and suffering. The civil lawsuit was filed 2 days later. Elder financial abuse, conversion, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy. Julian was asking for treble damages, which meant if we won, Blythe and Callum would owe me 3 times what they'd stolen.
Plus attorné est fait, plus punitif dommage.
The numbers were staggering. But money wasn't really the point anymore. The point was making sure they could never do this to anyone else. Elder abuse is one of the most underreported crimes in America because victims are often ashamed or afraid of getting family members in trouble. I wanted other victims to see that it was possible to fight back, possible to win. The criminal trial began 6 months later. I sat in the gallery every day, watching as the federal prosecution team laid out the case against my daughter and her husband. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, security footage, recorded confessions, witness testimony. Their defense attorney, a nervous man named Bradley Walsh, did his best. But what defense can you offer for attempted murder caught on camera? The most damaging evidence was the recording from our Sunday dinner. When the federal prosecutors played Blythe's voice saying, "You used the same 3 passwords for everything, Mom. I could guess your passwords in my sleep." The jury visibly reacted. Several jurors shook their heads in disgust. One woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Callum's confession was even worse. We had to move fast. The meds had her loopy. She wouldn't know. His voice echoed through the silent courtroom, casual and callous. When the prosecutor followed up with the hospital security footage, showing Blythe reaching for my ventilator tubing, I heard someone in the gallery gasp. Blythe took the stand in her own defense, a decision that surprised everyone, including her attorney. She wore a conservative blue suit and had styled her hair to look older, more mature. But when she opened her mouth, the same selfish, entitled person came through. "My mother was dying," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We were trying to protect her assets from hospital bills." The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chin, wasn't buying it. "Miss Thompson, did protecting your mother's assets require you to disconnect her ventilator supply?" Blythe's composure cracked. "I never touched her ventilator." "That's a lie." But the security footage had already been shown to the jury. Her denials just made her look more guilty. "And did protecting her assets require you to forge her signature on power of attorney documents?" AUSA, Chen continued. Blythe stammered something about emergency situations and family responsibilities, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. By the time she stepped down from the witness stand, even her own mother probably wouldn't have believed her. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned with their verdict, the courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and curious onlookers. On the charge of elder financial abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all counts. Both of them. Blythe collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Callum just stared straight ahead like he couldn't believe this was happening to him. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month and remanded both defendants to custody without bail. They were led away in handcuffs, just like the day they were arrested. Sentencing day was like the final act of a very long, very sad play. Judge Margaret Harrison was known for being tough on elder abuse cases, and she didn't disappoint. She sentenced Blythe to 15 years in federal prison and Callum to 12 years. "Elder abuse is one of the most heinous crimes in our society," she said, looking directly at them. "You betrayed the trust of someone who loved you unconditionally." 15 years. Blythe would be 53 when she got out, if she served her full sentence. Callum would be 47. Their children would be grown adults by then, strangers who'd grown up knowing their parents were criminals. The perfect life they'd tried to steal from me was gone forever, replaced by prison uniforms and supervised visits. But the criminal convictions were just the beginning of their punishment. The civil trial was even more devastating because the standard of proof was lower, and Julian Pike was a master at extracting maximum damages from defendants who'd already been proven guilty in criminal court. We sued them for everything they had and everything they might ever have. Their house, their cars, their retirement accounts, Callum's business, even Blythe's jewelry. The court ordered all their assets frozen pending the outcome of the trial. They couldn't sell anything, couldn't transfer anything, couldn't hide anything from the judgment that was coming. The civil jury awarded me $4.8 million in compensatory and punitive damages. Since they'd stolen $3.2 million, that meant they owed me an additional $1.6 million for pain and suffering, emotional distress, and punitive damages. Julian had asked for treble damages. The jury didn't go that far but still awarded significant punitive damages, bringing the total to $4.8 million. Of course, collecting the money was another matter entirely. They'd already spent most of what they'd stolen, and prison inmates don't earn much income. But I didn't care about collecting every penny. I cared about making sure they never lived comfortably again, that they never forgot the price of trying to murder their own mother. The house they'd bought with my stolen money went to auction. I bought it myself, through a shell company, for less than half what they'd paid. Then I had it demolished. Every brick, every board, every trace of their dream home reduced to rubble and hauled away. In its place, I donated the land to the city for a small park with a bench and a plaque dedicating it to victims of elder abuse. Emma and Jake were the innocent casualties in all of this. They went to live with Callum's sister in another state, far from the shame and scandal of their parents' crimes. I sent them cards on birthdays and holidays, but I never saw them again. Their aunt thought it was better for them to have a clean break from the whole situation. I understood, but it hurt. Those children had been lights in my life, and losing them was like losing pieces of my heart. But they deserved to grow up without the shadow of what their parents had done hanging over them. Sometimes love means letting go, even when it breaks you. The media attention was intense for a while. Local woman exposes daughter's murder plot, read the headlines. Grandmother fights back against elder abuse. I gave a few interviews to raise awareness about elder financial crimes, but mostly I tried to stay out of the spotlight. I wasn't interested in fame. I was interested in justice. One interview stuck with me, though. A reporter asked if I felt guilty about sending my own daughter to prison. Guilt is for people who've done something wrong, I told her. I protected myself from people who were trying to kill me. If that makes me a bad mother, then I'll be a bad mother who's still breathing. The months after the trials were the hardest. For so long, I'd been focused on building cases and gathering evidence and planning strategies. Now that it was over, I had to figure out how to live with what had happened. How do you go on when your own child tries to murder you for money? I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in trauma and family betrayal. What you experienced, she told me, is one of the deepest betrayals possible. A child turning against a parent violates our most basic assumptions about love and loyalty. She helped me understand that my anger and sadness were normal, even necessary. I also started volunteering with a local organization that helped elder abuse victims navigate the legal system. So many older people suffer in silence because they're ashamed or afraid or don't know where to turn for help. I became a voice for victims who couldn't find their own voices. Speaking at conferences and support groups, I told my story over and over. Not for attention or sympathy, but to show other victims that they weren't powerless, that they could fight back and win. You don't have to be a victim forever, I would tell them. You can choose to be a survivor instead. 3 years after the trial, I got a letter from Blythe in prison. She'd found religion, she said, and wanted my forgiveness. She was sorry for what she'd done, sorry for the pain she'd caused. She hoped we could reconcile when she got out of prison. She signed it, "Your loving daughter." I read the letter 3 times, then put it in my shredder. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness. I'd spent 76 years learning that lesson, and I wasn't about to forget it now. Callum never wrote. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he blamed everything on Blythe, claiming she'd manipulated him into going along with her schemes. Typical Callum, taking responsibility for nothing. He was scheduled for release 2 years before Blythe, assuming good behavior. I made sure the parole board knew about his lack of remorse. My health, surprisingly, improved after the trials. Dr. Peterson said it was probably because I was no longer living under constant stress. Trauma can manifest in physical symptoms, he explained. Now that you're safe and the threat is removed, your body can focus on healing. My heart grew stronger. My energy returned. My appetite came back. I moved to a smaller house closer to downtown with better security and neighbors who checked on each other. I installed cameras and an alarm system, not because I was paranoid, but because I was practical. Trust, once broken, never fully heals. I would never again assume that anyone had my best interests at heart. On the 8th anniversary of my heart attack, I visited my own grave. Not literally, of course, but the cemetery plot I'd bought years earlier, with a headstone already engraved with my name and birth date. The death date was still blank. Blythe and Callum had tried to fill it in 8 years ago, but I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. Standing there in the quiet cemetery, I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had sustained me through months of legal battles had burned itself out, leaving behind something cleaner and stronger. Not forgiveness. I would never forgive what they'd done, but acceptance of what was and determination to make the most of what remained. That evening, I called Dr. Peterson's office and scheduled my annual checkup. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Ashford?" his nurse asked. "Grateful," I told her. "I'm feeling grateful. Grateful to be alive, grateful for every breath, grateful for the chance to protect other people from experiencing what I'd experienced. The money I recovered from the civil judgment, what little of it I could actually collect, went into a trust fund for elder abuse victims. Julian Pike helped me set it up to provide legal assistance for older people who couldn't afford attorneys. The Marin Ashford Foundation for Elder Justice, he called it. My name on something positive for once, instead of just court documents and police reports. I kept working with victim advocacy groups, speaking at law enforcement conferences, training bank employees to recognize signs of elder financial abuse. My story became a case study in criminal justice textbooks, an example of how victims could fight back against family members who betrayed them. But the most important thing I did was write a book. Betrayed. A Mother's Fight for Justice became a bestseller, not because people were looking for entertainment, but because so many families were dealing with similar situations. Elder abuse was an epidemic, I learned, hidden behind closed doors and family loyalty. The book tour was exhausting but rewarding. In every city, elderly people approached me to share their own stories of financial abuse by children, grandchildren, caregivers. "Thank you for speaking up," they would say. "Thank you for showing us we don't have to suffer in silence." One woman in Phoenix told me her son had stolen her Social Security checks for 2 years. Another in Denver described how her daughter had forged her name on a reverse mortgage, leaving her homeless at age 80. The stories were heartbreaking, but what gave me hope was seeing these victims find their voices, find their courage, find their strength to fight back. As my 80th birthday approached, reporters started calling again, wanting to do follow-up stories about how I was doing, what had happened to Blythe and Callum, whether I had any regrets. I told them the same thing I'd been saying for years. I regretted being naive enough to trust people who didn't deserve it, but I didn't regret fighting back. Blythe was still in prison, with 8 more years left on her sentence. She'd been denied early parole twice for disciplinary infractions. Apparently, prison didn't agree with her any better than accountability had. Callum had been released but violated his parole within 6 months and was sent back to finish his original sentence. Emma and Jake were both in college now, both using their aunt's last name instead of Thompson. They'd built new lives far from the scandal of their parents' crimes. I hoped they were happy, hoped they'd learned that actions have consequences, hoped they would never put money ahead of love the way their parents had. On my 80th birthday, I threw myself a party. Not a big, fancy affair, but a gathering of the people who mattered. My therapist, my attorney, my doctor, the volunteers from the elder abuse organization, the neighbors who'd become real friends. We ate cake and told stories and celebrated the fact that I was still here, still fighting, still making a difference. Dr. Peterson gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry at the same time. To Marin Ashford, he said, raising his glass, who proved that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's living well and helping others do the same. I couldn't have said it better myself. As the party wound down and my friends went home, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. 8 years ago, I'd been lying in an ICU bed, helpless and betrayed, watching my own daughter try to murder me. Tonight, I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, having just celebrated 8 decades of life. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. For a moment, I wondered if it might be Blythe, calling from prison to try one more manipulation. But it was Emma, my granddaughter, now 22 and finishing her senior year of college. "Happy birthday, Grandma," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but I wanted you to know I was thinking about you." We talked for an hour about her studies, her job prospects, her boyfriend who sounded like a decent young man. She didn't mention her parents, and neither did I. That chapter of our family story was closed, but new chapters were being written. Better chapters, with honesty and respect instead of lies and theft. After we hung up, I walked through my house, turning off lights and checking locks. The security system beeped softly as I armed it for the night. These rituals weren't about fear anymore. They were about self-care, about taking responsibility for my own safety and well-being. In my bedroom, I opened the drawer where I kept copies of all the legal documents from Blythe and Callum's cases. Court orders, conviction records, civil judgments, proof that justice had been served. I didn't look at them often anymore, but I kept them as reminders that victims could become victors if they were brave enough to fight back. As I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. An 80-year-old woman with silver hair and laugh lines, wearing comfortable pajamas instead of a hospital gown. Alive, healthy, and strong. Blythe had tried to write my ending 8 years ago, but I'd taken back the pen and written a different story. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in years. No nightmares about hospital rooms or ventilator tubing. No anxiety about trust or betrayal. Just the deep, restful sleep of someone who had faced their demons and won. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through my windows and I could hear birds singing outside. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the same ritual I'd performed thousands of times before. But this morning felt different, felt like the beginning of something new rather than the continuation of something painful. I was 80 years old, and I had survived the worst betrayal imaginable. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. The newspaper headline that morning made me smile. Local foundation helps convict elder abuse scammer. Another victory for justice, another predator put away where they couldn't hurt vulnerable seniors. The work I was doing mattered, and it would continue mattering long after I was gone. As I finished my coffee, I thought about the advice I would give to my younger self, the woman who had trusted too easily and loved too blindly. Don't be afraid to set boundaries, I would tell her. Don't confuse kindness with weakness. And remember that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones you need to protect yourself from. The doorbell rang, and I found my neighbor Sarah on the front step with a plate of homemade muffins. "Happy belated birthday," she said with a warm smile. "I baked too many, and thought you might like some. This was what real family looked like. People who showed up without ulterior motives, who gave without expecting anything in return. We sat in my kitchen and talked about ordinary things, the weather, the neighborhood, her grandchildren's latest adventures. Normal conversation between friends who had chosen to be in each other's lives, not people bound together by obligation or greed. It was peaceful in a way I'd forgotten family interactions could be. After Sarah left, I called the elder abuse hotline where I volunteered and scheduled myself for the next available shift. There were always more victims who needed help, more families torn apart by financial abuse, more elderly people who thought they had nowhere to turn. My story had ended well, but theirs were still being written. That afternoon, I drove to the small park that had been built on the site of Blythe and Callum's former dream house. The plaque dedicating it to elder abuse victims gleamed in the sunshine. Children were playing on the swings while their parents watched from the benches. Life had grown from the ashes of betrayal. As I sat on one of those benches, watching families enjoy the space that had once housed such ugliness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years.
Peace.
Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. I had turned my worst experience into something that helped other people. That was a legacy worth leaving. The sun was setting as I drove home, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Beautiful, like the sunrise I'd watched from my hospital bed 8 years ago, thinking my life might be ending. Instead, it had been transformed into something stronger, something more meaningful than I'd ever imagined possible. Tonight, I would sleep well again. Tomorrow, I would wake up and continue the work of protecting other seniors from experiencing what I'd experienced. And someday, when my real ending finally came, it would be on my terms, surrounded by people who genuinely loved me, having made a difference in the world. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. Don't forget to like this video if Marin's story moved you, subscribe for more incredible true stories, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they think, and let me know in the comments what you thought about Marin's journey from victim to survivor.